Thank you ever so much, Andrew and Karina, and thank you ever so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Can people wave at the back if you can't hear me? Brilliant. No waves, that's good. So I'm absolutely delighted to join and help open this conference. I'm also feeling rather humble. There's a huge amount of very, very experienced people, very eminent people in this room who've been involved in guidelines, who've lived and breathed guideline development and implementation for many, many years. I've been involved in one guideline. So why am I here? And I'll deal with my interests as well at the same time. I'm the brother of a woman with learning disabilities who uses services. I also chaired a guideline committee on designing services for people with learning disabilities, or as it's known in some countries, intellectual impairments, designing guidelines on services for people with learning disabilities who have behaviour that challenges. And this was, I believe, the first guideline in the world to fully involve people with learning disabilities as full committee members. I'm also the Chief Executive of Voiceability, an organisation that supports disabled people and people who face disadvantage to have stronger voices and real control over their lives. I believe that involving people who use services throughout guideline development, dissemination and implementation isn't just the right thing to do, but it also helps to get better results. And that's why I'm here, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to cover 4 things. Current practice, and a bit of advanced warning, I'm going to ask for your help with that. Why involve people? What are the kind of lessons that we're learning about this? And what are the benefits of doing so? So the first thing, current practice. I'm really interested to hear from you. Actually, let me just skip on to that a little bit later. So my aim in this really is if you go away from this presentation joining the increasing number of people who believe that it's vital to fully involve people in guidelines, then I'll have done my job. And if being the speaker before the tea break, I keep you awake, I'll also have done my job. So I'm going to talk about, there's lots of different language used. People talk about patient service users, patients and relatives, patients and the public. I'm just going to say people, unless the context demands further explanation. So I think that there's a growing acceptance that it's vital to involve people. Gone are the days that were spoken about earlier when guidelines were developed by a bunch of smart doctors in a room by themselves. Differences, however, remain in practice as to how well people are involved. So I'm going to just do a quick poll using old technology of hands in the air and ask you, think about guidelines you've been involved in most recently. How many people feel that there's consistently really good practice in involving people in guideline development, involving people that use services, people that use healthcare? So can I have a show of hands? Consistently good practice. So a fair few people around the room, come up here, you can do the talk instead, you're getting it right. People where there's some involvement, but things could be improved, not as consistent, not as powerful, not as well arranged. Can I have a show of hands? A growing group of people, and people who are yet to do anything to involve people in guideline development. Fabulous. So everyone is doing something to involve people. A fair number of people, there's a considerable room for improvement. A fair number of people feel, actually, you know what, we're getting it right. So, and that echoes very much the feedback I got as I walked around the room at the the Science Museum last night and heard the one word I heard the most was, it's variable. It's variable. So why do it? I'd recommend that the GIN Toolkit, GIN Public Toolkit, Patient and Public Involvement in Guidelines, updated 3 years ago, a really excellent publication, and it gives 3 reasons. It ensures people can make their own well-informed decisions. It helps to democratise decisions about healthcare and resources and align these decisions with public values. And actually, the expertise of people using services improves guidelines. The guideline that I was involved in, it was very clear from an early stage that unless we fully involve people with learning disabilities as committee members, the guideline would lack credibility within an English context. Could I have the first slide? So the slogan, "Nothing about us without us," has become a rallying cry for many disability and patient groups. It has its roots in the self-advocacy movement with people with learning disabilities. It has parallels in patient activism from the early days of the AIDS pandemic in the 1980s and from other movements. So there's a strong view that it's simply no longer acceptable to exclude people who use services or patients from decisions, either individually or collectively. No longer acceptable. I agree with that view. I also think that there are major advantages in involving people at every level. This is put much more clearly by some of the members of Guideline committees who have learning disabilities. And hopefully we have a video that's just coming up to show us that. Fabulous, thank you.
So if I had to explain to my friends what I do in the NICE committee would be to keep it real. So I think that lots of people talk about what they should do for people in a very detached way. When I mean detached, in a way that isn't based on what is really happening at grassroots. And I think it's really important that people like myself and Paul that have lived experience keep it real and actually bring the experience of people like ourselves into the room and challenge, but challenge in a way that isn't just about challenging. It's about ensuring that we all can have a better approach and service for people.
Because people with learning disabilities don't very get opportunity to do this kind of stuff, and it's their experience to understand, to put their views over it and help their friends and colleagues and all that.
I think that we should be heard so that people know that we're not just, shall we say, here making up the numbers. We're here to be heard so that we can talk and to make people think as well.
Well, yeah, I think, because I'd hate people to not have their voice and have their say, and some people are just brushed under the carpet because they don't know where to go.
Support is key to being able to, for me personally, to participate in the meeting. So there's lots of pre-reading, lots of thinking through kind of some of the pre-information. That's done supported by colleagues who have different experiences, but also an organisation called Paradigm.
We meet the day before and have a planning meeting so we know what this meeting's about, and I think that's really helpful.
Yes, it's vital.
The other committee members have said how useful they found the pre-work that we've done, because what we will do is we'll go through all of the research and we'll have easy to understand and easy read versions with pictures, and we'll talk through each point, and it's really important because everybody has a different kind of opinion, and it helps us as a group to understand what are the key messages that we need to present.
Come along and give it a go. I mean, we've achieved it.
So some of the really key things were about grounding the committee in the real experience of people and people's real lives. We couldn't forget that. What we did, our committee had 4 people with learning disabilities who used services, including people who had experience of using services for people whose behaviour was seen as very challenging, and also had 5 people who had experience as family carers or relatives. Our recruitment tested out the real practical skills that people had in engaging with other people and their ability to represent the views of many people. We thought it was pointless to test academic and written skills with people where that wasn't what we were looking for. We were looking for their understanding and their ability to garner the views of other people. Facilitation was pointed out as being really critical. Straightforward language, considering carefully how meetings are run. I'm going to say a little bit more about that later on. It wasn't straightforward. We were involving people with intellectual impairments in a highly intellectual process, but with excellent support from NICE staff members, from the partner organisations. We made sure that the guidelines were much more effective for having that involvement. Some of the real benefits were making sure that the guidelines really focused on individual people, getting away from what was described earlier as cookbook guidelines. And there were particular recommendations that I do not believe would have been made had it not been for the involvement of people with learning disabilities on that committee. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, okay, that may work in some areas around social care, or it may work in areas where the evidence base isn't so strong and opinion on the committee is that much more important. I don't think that's true. I challenge that opinion. There are always gaps in evidence, and the perspective of people on the receiving end is always vital. As Fergus described, we're always making decisions in the face of uncertainties. And even in the most complex areas, there are alternative choices in very many situations, as Gordon's presentation made clear. So that focus on providing really good decision-making aids to patients, and why wouldn't you involve patients themselves in developing those? So to give a few examples from other guidelines, and I'm grateful to Victoria Thomas from NICE's public involvement team who's documented a number of results. I was particularly struck by one which was that people with mental health needs who self-harmed, who cut themselves, were frequently not offered analgesia or anaesthetic when those were being sutured. And that didn't come through from the literature, that only came through from engaging with people who'd had that experience. Ensuring that the right questions are asked in the first place when the searches and the systematic reviews are done. So, for example, from carers, making sure that the search terms described not what the condition was of the person that they were caring for, but their own circumstances, made sure that there was much better, much more accurate research done. In kidney dialysis, where professionals had tended to assume that people would prefer dialysis at home, patients said, well, actually, that's often not the case. That's often not what we want. So I've described some of the overall benefits that have been identified really well by by Gin: better accountability to the public, greater expertise, and supporting patient choice. I'd add a fourth reason, and that's that I believe that user involvement goes hand in hand with better decision-making and better committee working. I believe that involving people who use services makes our committees run better and makes our other processes for developing implementation tools work better. Or to put it another way, committees that work well for people who use services, for patients, for members of the public, are likely to work well for everyone that's involved in them. And I absolutely agree with Fergus's call for a better understanding of the biases and the pressures in what he rightly described as a black box of decision-making in the face of uncertainty. I believe that that kind of examination goes hand in hand with increasing service user involvement. And I'm going to describe a little bit more about why that's so. So, over the past few decades, behavioural science and underpinning research have strongly criticised the model of us as people who always coolly, rationally weigh up decisions and make rational choices. Instead, it said, well, actually, we're subject to a whole range of pressures that dramatically affect how it is that we make decisions. Deference, peer pressure, the environment in which decisions are taken make a dramatic difference to the decisions that we take. And it's not just low-impact decisions by relatively unsophisticated decision takers. So to give an example from a completely different context, this graph describes how judges in the USA decided as to whether people who were alleged offenders and appeared before them, whether they were issued parole or not. The key determinant was not how serious was the offence. The key determinant wasn't how likely is this person to run away. The key determinant was how long is it since they'd eaten food. That was the thing that made the greatest difference. And you can see how the graph drops off when people are hungry. This is a bit of a warning slide for the last speaker before a break. This is a little bit scary for me. So the key point is that we must think about the environment and processes for decision taking if we want good decisions to be taken about guidelines. And I think Fergus has made that point very clearly. I believe that having a very mixed committee, including people who use services, can help us to think more about how the committee works and to improve decision taking by everyone. There are 4 key ways in which I observed that happening. We had clearer, better information. Initially, we used parallel text with simple English and the complicated stuff. We quickly moved away from that. Everyone wanted the straightforward language. The information that we were given to help us understand health economics, I understand, is now considered to be a model that could be used for other committees that do not include people with learning disabilities. Secondly, and this was highlighted by Isaac on the video, the use of facilitation. Good facilitation before meetings was critical to ensuring that people with learning disabilities could understand and participate in the meeting. It also helped the whole committee. The people with learning disabilities would draw up posters of their views, their understandings, their perspectives. They'd be available at the beginning of the meeting. People started crowding round those, reading them, understanding them. Other people on the committee started saying, well, actually, don't we need some kind of facilitation, some help to, ahead of the meeting? It forced us to think about ways that we can promote involvement, reduce deference, reduce the authority that some people may have over others. And we did that in some fun ways. We had early exercises at the beginning of each of our meetings, not physical exercises, but exercises that enable people to get to know each other, to get to understand the abilities and talents that they each had. Short tasks, it didn't take very long, half an hour in the first meeting, 10 minutes in subsequent meetings. And I believe that the atmosphere that created really helped to ensure very strong participation from all committee members, and it was reflected in the very good attendance at meetings through to the end. We did not have a big dropout as things moved through. And there also, the fourth thing was about making sure there's practical changes. So taking breaks often, making sure that we can recharge our brains. Remember those poor judges and the poor people that appeared before them when they were hungry and weren't likely to get out of prison as a result. So these were some of the things that we did. I believe more broadly, and I support Fergus's call, we've got to practice what we preach, and we've got to take an evidence-based approach as to how decisions are made in committees. My belief is that can go hand in hand with working out how we can better involve and more thoroughly involve people who use services. And I'm also not sure where that may take us, and whether that may take us in the end away from large committees meeting in single rooms at a single time with the pressure of time. I'm not sure that that's always going to be the best way of making good decisions. I'm also not sure that it's going to be the best way of involving people as guideline committee members who have greater impairments in doing that. So to summarise and to draw things to a close, I've talked about why we involve people, why we should involve people, how to involve people. I've talked about the benefits, and I believe passionately we will develop better guidelines as a result of fully involving people. But the title of our conference is Why We Do What We Do. And I do what I do because I believe that we can make our societies better for people who face disadvantage, for people who need healthcare treatment, for people who need social care treatment. I do what I do probably much more because of my sister and because of the other people in my life that matter to me and because of the importance of getting things right for them. I believe that by involving people who use services and their families throughout, you bring to the centre of guidelines not just the expertise, but also the commitment and the drive that comes from having people that have that passion in their lives, and the passion that comes from having to struggle for the life that you want and that you want for people who you love. And I think that could be extremely valuable all the way through the guideline development, dissemination, implementation process. I found from chairing a committee that I was also working with a community of professionals, of which you are the international expression, who also did what they did because they cared deeply about improving people's lives and wanted to use all of their considerable expertise to do this. So I'd like to close simply by thanking you for doing what it is that you do. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. As time is already, we're already after our schedule, behind our schedule, so I think we have time for one question, and the most rated was, were patients and people in the committee unite in their views and preferences, and if not, how was this dealt with?
I think the question is a somewhat rhetorical question in that we know that when we're talking about a large population, in this case, many, many thousands of people, we're never going to have a single view. And that's kind of what makes life exciting. And it's why it is that we look for people who did have good networks, who could bring the views of others and actually had the capability and the desire not just to speak for themselves. I think it is a hurdle. I think it is an issue. I think with any group of people, there's going to be a diversity of views. However, I don't think that that's a reason not to include people. I think that's a reason to include a number of different people. That's a reason to make sure that we use various different kinds of evidence alongside the direct testimony and involvement of people. But I'd also say, and you'll have found that when we look at a community of experts in any one area, we're going to find a diversity of views there as well. So I think it's a really important point. I think it is one that between us we can manage.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. And as chair of the GIN Public Working Group, which is committed to public and patient involvement in guidelines, I specifically thank the scientific committee for letting Jonathan concluding this session.